Good morning. Welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. This is your morning minute meditation for this morning. Let's take our Bibles and go to the book of Judges, Judges chapter 16. And when you get to the book of Judges, you can contrast the book of Joshua and the book of Judges. In the book of Joshua, you'll find the nation of Israel, what we would say the believer walking in the Spirit. You get to the book of Judges, we would say this is where the believer is walking in the flesh. And so we find that contrast in the book of Joshua and the book of Judges. The book of Joshua, we find the nation of Israel conquered the land by obedience. You get to the book of Judges, you'll find that through disobedience, the land conquered the nation of Israel. Of course, we do know that when you study the book of Judges, they're on a sin cycle, if you will. They would keep on sinning, asking God for deliverance, and God would send them a deliverer to deliver them. When you get to Judges chapter 16, the story will start in chapter 13. And it's through the life of a man by the name of Samson. We're all familiar with Samson. He was a strong man and a mighty strong man. But we find that he found his demise in his flesh. He was flirting with the flesh. You find that principle in the book of Judges. When you study Judges chapter 16, the whole account of Samson and Delilah, you'll find there's a catastrophe of compromise. And that's what you find Samson doing in the text. He's been called in chapter 13 to be a Nazarite from the womb to the tomb. When you get to chapter 16, you'll notice that Samson broke every one of the Nazarite vows. Matter of fact, his disobedience and Delilah led to his demise by the end of the chapter. And so when we look at the story and the life of Samson and Delilah, think on those things about how that flirting with the flesh is very dangerous. You'll find this in chapter 16. I want to read one verse this morning, and then we'll give you the thought concerning the catastrophe of compromise. Let's look at verse 21 together. Verse 21, but the Philistines took him, speaking about Samson, put out his eyes, and bound him, and brought him down to Gaza, bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. And so we find that there's a catastrophe of the child of God compromising. And so when you study this text, there's three things about our flesh I want you to notice real briefly. You'll notice in the first several verses of the book of Judges, from verses 4, I believe it is, down to verse number 6, you'll find there's the enticement of the flesh. Those lords of the Philistines come to Delilah, and they offer her a lump sum of money. Said, if we'll give you this money if you will entice him. And so we know that the flesh is very enticing. Out of all three women that the Bible gives us the recording of Samson's life, the Bible said he loved Delilah. That speaks of the affection. So your flesh has an affection and a pull to the things of this world. And if we're not careful, we compromise, it'll lead to a catastrophe. So there's the enticement of the flesh. Secondly, you'll notice that the lords of the Philistines paid her not only to entice him, but to bind him. So there's the ensnarement of the flesh. And so that's what Delilah does. She plays three games with Samson. She tests him, and that's exactly what your flesh will do. It'll test you. But what happened here in the text, Samson teased Delilah. With her testing him and him teasing her, he toyed with the flesh, and that got him into trouble. And then thirdly and finally, there's the endangerment of the flesh. So we looked at the girl that ensnared him, that enticed him. We looked at the game that ensnared him. But at the end of this chapter, you'll find that every game that Samson played with Delilah, he kept getting closer and closer and closer to the truth. Well, eventually he crossed that threshold. He crossed that line, and he transgressed for the last time, and he gave in to his flesh. And he told Delilah his heart. So there's the shared heart, there's the shaved head, and then finally in verse 21, there's the shackled hand. There's the blinding, there's the binding, and then there's the grinding. Child of God, be careful not to compromise. The only way you can deal with Delilah is distance yourself from her. Think on these things.